Xtalks is the industry leader in connecting life science, food, healthcare, and medical device professionals. The Xtalks Life Science Podcast features insightful conversations with industry experts about all things pharma, biotech, and more.
Hello and welcome to the Xtalks Life Science Podcast. I'm Ayesha Rashid, Senior Life Science Journalist at Xtalks.com, and this week I'm delighted to introduce our special guest on the show. We have with us today Dr. Marc Hedrick, who is the President and CEO of Plus Therapeutics, which is a company developing a new class of targeted radiotherapeutics. Prior to heading Plus Therapeutics, Dr. Hedrick served in a number of executive leadership roles, including President, CEO, and Director at Cytori Therapeutics, as well as serving as President and CEO of StemSource. Dr. Hedrick is a trained general, vascular, and plastic surgeon. He is a former associate professor of surgery and pediatrics at the University of California, Los Angeles, UCLA. And Dr. Hedrick also served as co-director of the Laboratory of Regenerative Bioengineering and Repair at UCLA. Dr. Hedrick obtained his MD from the University of Texas Southwestern Medical School, Dallas, as well as an MBA from the Anderson School at UCLA in 2005. To learn more about innovations in the area of radiotherapy and radiotherapeutics, including the work that Dr. Hedrick, of course, is leading at Plus Therapeutics, let's turn to him now. Thank you so much for being on the show with us today, Dr. Hedrick.
Ayesha, thank you for having me. Appreciate it.
And so I am fascinated by your journey in terms of from being a physician, a surgeon at that, and to entrepreneurship, and now to heading Plus Therapeutics as the president and CEO of the company. So could you tell us a bit about that journey, the evolution in your work, and what ultimately led you to Plus?
Yeah, I don't know that it's too dramatic, but I grew up wanting to be a physician and landed my dream job at UCLA, operating on mostly kids, but some adults, and also doing research. And as part of that research, we had a discovery. We cloned out a unique type of stem cell, and we're able to raise capital on that and develop it in a corporate setting, which allowed us to raise capital and move it forward. I left on sabbatical from my day job at UCLA, and then kind of one thing led to another. And next thing you know, 20 years is behind us, and I've been doing development on the business side. I mean, in my academic career, I was developing treatments for babies before they were born in the in utero environment. And then also for kids, and then ultimately adults, and then really now we're developing targeted radiotherapeutics, as you mentioned, limited to CNS cancers. Those are cancers of the brain, the spinal cord, but both in kids and in adults.
Wonderful. And so what really drew you to the intersection of medicine, biotech, and entrepreneurship?
You know, honestly, when I was a fellow at the University of California, San Francisco, the team I work with was fantastic. The leadership there was the kind of lead institution in the world in developing novel treatments for babies before they were born. So, for example, there are children in utero who have what would be devastating, life-threatening complications after they were born, but you could diagnose it by ultrasound before. So you knew, a disease tsunami was coming for these kids. And so that really drove the development of treating the baby while he or she is still in the womb. And then we were developing those therapies, some of which are now, I would say, routine use because it's really restricted to a rare group of kids that are in development, but they're commonplace in the United States now. So not everything lends itself to treatment in terms of in utero therapy, but an increasing number of things can actually be addressed early. So by the time the baby's born, they're really ready for life. And that really kind of created an opportunity to develop treatments, procedures, drugs, and new approaches to treat diseases that really don't have good therapeutic options right now. And then it could have been doing that almost on a daily basis since then.
That's wonderful to hear, really, those kinds of motivations behind what ultimately led you to what you're doing today. And I'd also like to know what attracted you to Plus Therapeutics specifically, and if you could outline what the company's missions and core focus are as well.
Yeah, the attractiveness of Plus is that we were able to craft a unique vision around taking this targeted radiotherapeutics, this emerging sector in drug development that was really sort of heating up over the last kind of 3 or 4 years, and then use the technology to address central nervous system cancers. And why central nervous system cancers? They're actually the most lethal and fatal cancers. They have the least therapeutic options. Things we're going after either haven't had drugs approved in over a decade, or there's nothing approved for these patients by the FDA. And so that, plus the fact that these cancers, to the degree that they're treatable, are best treated with radiation. So you get the most bang for your buck, the most incremental improvement in survival with radiation. But the problem with radiation is something called therapeutic index. I'll probably say that a time or two on the interview, but therapeutic index is the concept of getting enough of the drug, in this case radiation, to the region of interest, which is generally the tumor, but limiting the exposure to the normal organs and tissues, which limit the ultimate dose that you can give and therefore the ultimate response of the patient. So we felt like we had opportunities to deliver extremely high, heretofore unknown levels of therapeutic index of radiation to the tumor, and really limiting, minimizing, or having essentially zero impact to the liver, the bone marrow, the spleen, and these other organs that really dictate toxicity. And so that's really been the goal. Let's go after the toughest cancers. Let's go after them with a very high therapeutic index. Let's overcome the limitations of radiation that have plagued radiation therapy for CNS cancers for 50 plus years, and do it in a novel way that can materially improve patients' not only survival but their quality of life, because these patients oftentimes fairly early on will develop relatively severe neurologic disease, either related to the cancer or related to the surgery or the radiation. And so it limits their quality of life at the very end. And so we're trying to fix both, if you will.
Mm-hmm. And so, in terms of radiopharmaceuticals or radiotherapeutics, they've been around for decades. And so, in today's current landscape, as you mentioned, the field has been getting quite hot for the past several years, decade specifically. And so, what today, where are we at today in the field of radiotherapeutics? And what is Plus Therapeutics really focused on and aiming for in terms of the types of radiotherapeutics that perhaps you think will be most effective in enhancing radiation responses in these very rare cancers that you mentioned?
Yeah, so the way to think about it historically is that, going back, 100 years or so, there are radiation beams that are made by devices that, project, through normal tissue, hit the tumor, and then go out the normal tissue on the other side. And they're limited by how much radiation you can deliver, because you're treating not only the tumor, but you're treating normal tissue as well. So I-131, the 131 isotope of radioiodine, has been used with great success to treat thyroid abnormalities, malignant and non-malignant abnormalities. And so that really introduces a degree of targeting that you didn't have with a radiation beam. And the targeting takes advantage of the fact that the thyroid is the one organ and tissue in the body that is kind of made to take up iodine. And so if you can supercharge it with radiation, there's a natural channel to target it to, we say, the region of interest or the tumor, and preclude or limit the exposure elsewhere. And that's a beta radioisotope, similar to what we use in the cranio-neurospinal axis. So the more recent interest in targeted radiotherapeutics is the fact that you can now do more specific targeting. There are drugs that incorporate antibodies or small molecules or other things that can target specific tumors with pharmaceutical compounds. And it's really an extrapolation of that idea, now using the payload as a source of radiation. So if you can, target the radiation to the tumor, deliver it through the bloodstream, it concentrates where the tumor is, gives a disproportionate amount of radiation to the tumor, and then minimizes the exposure to the critical organs, the ones that cause toxicity. And so the problem there is, I mentioned before, is therapeutic index. You're concentrating the radiation to the region of interest, the tumor, but the level of concentration is 3 to 1, maybe. You're still getting a relatively sizable amount of radiation to the critical organs like the bone marrow. And so it's not ideal. It's better, but it's not ideal. So we sort of said, okay, the central nervous system is a very unique anatomic area within the body. It's protected by the blood-brain barrier. And only about 2% of all drugs on the market will actually cross this barrier to get into the brain and then get to the tumor. And the barrier is really there to protect the brain and the spinal cord from toxins, infections, and other things that might get into the bloodstream because of the criticality of the organs and tissue. So you can't really apply, what you would do for a radiotherapeutic delivered systemically necessarily to the brain and spinal cord because you've got the blood-brain barrier amongst other biologic protections that are built into that organ or tissue. So we really had to relook at delivery. And there are actually two different kinds of delivery techniques that were available that we created a marriage between our drug and those delivery techniques to accomplish much, much higher therapeutic index. And as I mentioned, that's the key. So now we're talking about 100 to 1. So not 1 to 1, not 3 to 1, but 100 to 1 therapeutic index is possible, meaning, for every 1 molecule of radiation, you're getting to maybe the bone marrow, you're getting 100 to the brain cancer or the spinal cord cancer. Those are terrific odds, and we've proven that in at least 2 different kinds of cancer, and likely a third here coming relatively soon. So the way we do that is for glioblastoma, which is a cancer of the brain tissue itself, called the parenchyma, or the brain tissue. We use something called convection-enhanced delivery. That was developed, I believe, at the NIH a few decades ago, but really it's all of the related technology, the imaging, the medical devices, the catheters, the software, and now implementing AI for case planning and other things. They're kind of all combining to make that a ready for prime time delivery technology. So we can get high doses of radiation, high therapeutic indices delivered specifically to the tumor and or the area around the tumor where the tumor recurs, but essentially get zero systemic exposure. So I'm highly confident that this technology will ultimately become standard of care for radiation delivery for lots of different kinds of brain types of tumors, both pediatric and adult. So it's our lead drug is called Rheobic, and Rheobic married with convection enhanced delivery, and the technology envelope allows us to deliver unmatched levels of radiation to the brain tumor. That's actually a relatively small group of patients. So there are about 15,000 newly diagnosed patients every year in the US that have glioblastoma. It's well known because that's just enough that most of us know either somebody that's had it or have a friend who has a friend who's had it. It's such a compelling, devastating diagnosis that when somebody has it, there's no hiding it. One knows about it. But it's a relatively small group of patients. And we'll talk about kind of how we're approaching that maybe in a minute. But there's also a much more common uh, disease or cancer of the fluid around the brain. The fluid around the brain is called the cerebrospinal fluid. And it's part of the physical protection of the brain. It's within the blood-brain barrier, but it's kind of a cushioning and nourishing environment for the brain and spinal cord. As common cancers like brain cancer, lung cancer, melanoma that we all know about and are relatively common, as we do a better job as doctors and companies to develop drugs for those tumors outside the CNS, cells will escape. They'll find imperfections in the blood-brain barrier. They'll get into that protected environment, and once you're into that environment, patients do really poorly. They die, on average, with 4 to 6 weeks without treatment, and 4 to 6 months with treatment. Even though there's nothing approved, doctors will throw the kitchen sink at many of these patients to try to extend their life. And so, arguably, there's an epidemic of it's called leptomeningeal cancer in the community because more and more people are living longer with breast cancer or lung cancer or melanoma. But those cells aren't cured. Cells will get out, they'll get in there, and then it's really a bad situation for the patient. So there's a very well developed delivery technology to get drugs into and out of the fluid space around the brain. And when I was a resident physician many years ago, this technology was out there. It's like a chemotherapy port, but for the brain fluid. And you place that once, and it gives you two-way access to the fluid. Not only can you, at any point in time, you can put a drug into the fluid. You can do it every day if you wanted to, but you can also take fluid out for testing. And that's called leptomeningeal cancer. And we can, again, deliver very high therapeutic doses just to the region of interest to clear out the tumor that's sitting in the CSF. And so we have these two different delivery methodologies. We have one drug called Ryobic and two ways to get it into the CNS. And it largely allows us to target any particular type of cancer of the CNS.
Wow. That's that's very, I think some of the innovations that like you mentioned, some of these technologies were around decades ago, but to really bring them to the forefront today, coupling them with different advancements, like you mentioned, AI in terms of in clinical trials, identifying the right patients to drug discovery. So I think really applying new technologies and in order to bring those older technologies and really marry them and to really come up with the amazing therapeutics that Plus is working on is really a testament to science really being something that keeps building upon itself. So that's
it's layered innovation.
Absolutely.
And in some cases, you had these technologies that were just waiting for a drug. And I think we've really I think we're in the lead in terms of developing a very specific formulated design drug that leverages those delivery modalities specifically for these kinds of cancers.
Indeed.
Pretty exciting.
It is very exciting. And the fact that you are targeting these very these cancers with high unmet need and very limited or no therapeutic options. And I think that really, if you're able to target these, and that opens the door to other cancers that may be more treatable currently, but you may be able to offer better or more enhanced therapeutic options. So that's absolutely fantastic. And in terms of, I think you did touch on this, but for you, what have been kind of the most exciting advancements in the field of radiotherapy and of course radiotherapeutics in the past several years that has really allowed for things to be driven forward to where they are today?
I mentioned kind of proof of concept, which was radioactive iodine therapy for thyroid disease, and there was, more recently a proof of concept in neuroendocrine tumors, where you can get very specific levels of targeting. Those are relatively rare cancers. Prostate cancer being one where you can also get, some degree of targeting, and that's a very common cancer for older men. And it's a slow growing tumor, one that lends itself to a targeted radiotherapeutic approach. So those have been sort of the next generation proof of principle. So those were, I think those, particularly the more recent developments in neuroendocrine cancers, could have propelled us to really go after the cancers that we've had with a unique approach, but leveraging the manufacturing and drug development infrastructure for radiotherapeutics. So that was very important. We're in a unique position, and I'm very excited to tout this, that all three of our clinical programs right now receive an aggregate of about $25 million in external grant support from the NIH, the state of Texas, the Department of Defense in the U.S. All in aggregate are funding our programs right now. So those were very exciting milestones to be able to get that third-party validation from experts in the field in the U.S. that recognize the clinical need and the opportunity that our drug presents. And then I think it's been the last 6 weeks actually, we've kind of first major publication, Nature, or the Nature Communications, are one of the leading most high impact scientific publications in the world, and they accepted our phase 1 glioblastoma clinical data for publication. It's out in electronic format, soon to be old-fashioned paper format. But there've been a number of scientific and clinical milestones that have been very exciting. I'll tell you the thing that I remember the most is interviewing patients. So I made it a point to spend time with the patients that we treat to kind of understand, what's their patient journey, what sort of challenges have they had with these particular diseases, how it's affect their family. I ran in a 5K with one of our glioblastoma patients about 3 years ago in Dallas, and have interviewed a number of patients. And so that really kind of keeps me grounded to what specifically these patients are going through, that I might not otherwise see that more on the drug development side, sitting in the office, sitting on Zoom, having calls, even talking to their physicians. You really don't get a feel for what the patients are going through and what the clinical need is. And those are very energizing and, kind of centering milestones that, I don't really talk about much. They don't get necessarily publicly portrayed, except maybe if you listen to the interviews, but they're very encouraging and continue to stimulate the company and the people we work with. And here's a for example, to put that into numbers. If you look at the therapeutic technology that we are developing, and you look at a recently acquired diagnostic platform for CNS cancers, because there's a big problem in terms of treating these cancers, because not only is there a therapeutic problem, but there's a diagnostic problem. We've actually merged those two together within Plus. And if you look at the incremental impact of just commercializing the diagnostic, and then you add that to the commercial impact and therapeutic impact of the therapy, it's not a stretch to say we're talking about 150 million added days to Americans were these two things approved every year. So really, you can get, because of the poor survivals, because of the nature of the diseases and the addressable market, the the impact in terms of actual, additional days of life is pretty sobering, actually. And so if you think about what's the one thing that gets me up every morning, if I had to, put a pin in that, it would be that number.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Just putting things into perspective and context like that. Absolutely. I can see why you do what you do, and you're doing a wonderful job leading that amazing work at Plus Therapeutics. And I also really appreciate the fact that we hear about patient centricity and patient centric trials and all of that, but I often question, what does that really mean? And I think you really put that into perspective, and what you outlined in terms of the patient interviews, and really trying to hone in on their experiences to really understand the disease, not just scientifically or biologically, but also from a clinical human perspective. I think that's so key to everything. And thank you so much for everything that you do, and for providing those perspectives and looking for those perspectives, indeed. And also in terms of going back to, I guess, the nitty gritty of drug development, what are some of sort of the more specific challenges around developing radiotherapeutics, and are there any distinguishing factors or any specific or unique considerations, challenges when compared to the development of small molecules or even biologics, which are more complex, of course, but what are sort of the niche or unique challenges and considerations for radiotherapeutics?
Yeah, it's a great question. And all drug development is complex, expensive, time consuming, and it has its own unique challenges. I think the principal challenge that and I don't think I'm speaking just for myself, I'm thinking for anybody that's in this field, is supply chain. So when you put a pill in a pill package, or you put a drug in a vial, there's a certain amount of shelf life that's associated with that. You can build a big inventory, you can put it on the shelf, you can ship it out to hospitals and clinics. It can sit there for weeks or months, some cases years. And when they need it, they pull it off and deliver it to the patient. You can't do that with a radiotherapeutic. It's decaying. I mean, you're fighting, the half-life of the radioisotope every day. So it creates challenges, overcomable challenges, but it creates challenges as it relates to manufacturing, supply chain management. It creates a business need for radiation services. How do you develop these radioisotopes and then put them into drugs that need to be of a sufficient quality to be able to be manufactured and approved in the U.S. and in other markets. So what becomes critical is the selection of the radioisotope, because you can't just select necessarily the ideal one for that particular tumor type or tumor location. You have to be practical in that radioisotope in terms of, can you make it? Is it easy to make? Are there significant supply constraints? What's the half-life? The shorter the half-life, the quicker it decays, and the tighter the logistics have to be to deliver that drug. And so that's something that is unique and inherent, I think, to radiotherapeutics. I think we are in a fortunate position, and people that came before me in terms of developing our portfolio of drugs have made selections that maximize the opportunity as it relates to clinical benefit, and then also has a supply chain that's extremely flexible. And the radioisotope we use for our lead drug, Rheobic, is rhenium-186. It's made from a salt of aluminum, and it's radiated in a reactor, but it has a relatively long half-life of about 90 hours. And so it can be ordered by the physician or the hospital clinic. We can make it essentially to order, and then it's a couple of days of manufacturing, it's shipped out. and then it can sit at the facility for 3 or 4 days. You can actually recalibrate the radiation, because what you're calculating is a physical property, not so much a chemical property, if you will. So there's a lot of flexibility in the supply chain. The patient misses their appointment, surgery is rescheduled. There's some flexibility at the hospital or clinic level to use that same dose to treat the patient. And the supply chain that we've crafted and that we'll be continuing to make increasingly more efficient has good economics which impacts the company or shareholders and our ability to deliver that for not only the U.S. market, but also for markets outside the U.S.
Indeed. And you mentioned some of the stakeholders and collaborations we're seeing more and more so in pharma and biotech. And so are there any specific collaborations that Plus Pharmaceuticals currently has, whether strategic partnerships with academic centers, other industry players, and that sort of thing?
Yeah, I would say it's a very complex partnering environment that we live in, and it's complex because the technology's layered, as I mentioned. So we're partnered with a great German company called BrainLab, who has commercial systems related to convection enhanced delivery, and they have software tools that we're actually working with them to continue to improve and develop that allow the case planning, because this is personalized therapy in many cases. And so there's sort of that technology layering. There's supply chain layering. So we have key partners with Telix and ITG. It's one of our partners. MER is a radiation services provider in Missouri. And we have a number of others that probably too lengthy to mention, but some that people may know. I just mentioned before. So there are multiple layers of those. Plus, we have our grant partners. So we work very closely with the state of Texas. It's been incredibly supportive of. We're a Texas-based company. Our lead sites at MD Anderson, University of Texas Southwestern, University of Texas San Antonio have been really instrumental in getting us into later phase trials. And then with our physician partners, and this is something that may not be apparent, but neuro-oncology is a very small space. If you look at the doctors that kind of lead the treatment of patients with brain cancers, they're neuro-oncologists. They're just under 300 in the country, and they're largely at specialized centers. Some of the care goes to the medical oncologists, but really the thought leaders are really in neuro-oncology. And so we've had we do have terrific relationships with the thought leaders in the U.S. that's expertise we can't really we can't build that into the company. You can't go out and hire necessarily that level of expertise. So we're really very reliant on physician leaders that are have a heart for these patients, but also are want to create new opportunities to treat these patients and help us partner with us in kind of making these drugs available to patients, and then delivering on the clinical data that ultimately is going to support a regulatory approval and commercialization and broad-based application of these. So we couldn't do it without them. So hence the complexity, right? It's partnering along kind of multiple axes to get the job done. So the company is really the quarterback in a way, for very harnessing all these talents and commercial enterprises, physicians and scientists and governments to be able to deliver this. So it's the ultimate orchestration.
Mm-hmm. A symphony of sorts, for sure.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. And in terms of the field having come so far, where do you envision radiotherapeutics? I know sometimes radiopharmaceuticals is
they're interchangeable.
Are they interchangeable or?
They are.
Okay.
Yeah, they are.
So where do you see the field heading in the next couple of years, and what are some of the innovations that you think will be game changing, really?
So yeah, it's a good question. I think uh, rather than kind of go right to the crystal ball or just kind of think about incremental improvements in development. So kind of layer one is um, 35, maybe 40% of patients with cancer receive some sort of radiation. So it's very high percentage of patients that receive radiation. I mentioned the limitations of external beam radiation because that's what most of it is. They're fancy versions of it, but it's external beam radiation. I think there's an opportunity for uh, pharmaceutically delivered radiation to supplant external beam, or perhaps work in parallel. There's might be some opportunities there. The so there's that's sort of kind of one level. Another level is that right now there are very few drugs that are approved that are targeted radiotherapeutics, but you can almost look at any cancer and or target as a potential for a radiopharmaceutical to treat them. And that'll be over a decade or more as those things kind of come through development. But radiation oftentimes works very well uh, in combination with surgery and with drugs that are on the market. Some, for example, in CNS, there are some uh, uh, immunomodulatory drugs that work in concert very well with radiation and cross the blood-brain barrier. So there are combinatorial, treatment regimes, kind of crossing the different, lineages of types of therapies that can work in combination. So I think, there's this, probably some degree of replacement of radiation. There's going to be an expansion in terms of numbers of types of tumors that are treated, and then a combination with current drugs that don't have good, radiation combinatorial options. And we see that very clearly in what we're doing, and specifically in leptomeningeal cancer. There are some drugs that cross the blood-brain barrier that are going to be synergistic. We're seeing that preclinically, and likely going to be, exploring those in a clinical basis relatively soon. So, so really, I think we're just scratching the surface for what's possible. We've kind of staked out our area, which is central nervous system cancers, the worst of the worst, and then leveraging targeted radiotherapeutics. And there's another opportunity here that I haven't mentioned. It's a preclinical at Plus right now, but there are treatments that leverage angiographic delivery. So people that have had a heart cath or a leg cath or some other type of catheterization will know that they're very simple procedures and well-developed technologies to drive a catheter through the bloodstream upstream to an organ, and then you can load specific areas of that organ up with radiation if you have the right kind of drug. And you can see the tumor, you can drive the catheter right to the tumor, you can put the radiation, lock it into that place, deliver the radiation, and then the drug can be bioabsorbed and go away and restore circulation thereafter, and the body can come in and do the things that it does to help get rid of the tumor. That's a radioembolic drug. And so I think there are going to be kind of new types of delivery that we'll kind of layer onto this as well to open up different avenues, different types of doctors treating these patients, and different opportunities for drugs and radioisotopes.
Yeah, that's very cool. I think drug delivery is a huge area of consideration, and definitely seeing innovations in that will definitely drive better and more enhanced therapies for sure. And in terms of Plus Therapeutics, what can we expect in the next couple of months? Some key milestones that we can look forward to in the upcoming years. What are you most excited about heading forward?
Yeah, I wish I could think in terms of the next couple of months, but unfortunately, we have to think about the next couple of years
Of
and
course,
the
yeah.
longer
Yep.
term horizon. But I think if I look at we're a quarter of the way through the year, kind of what we think about over the next year. we have 3 clinical programs, and we have some important upcoming milestones in each of those 3 clinical programs. First of all, our goal is to finish up our phase 2 for glioblastoma. I mentioned the phase 1 data that was published in Nature Communications. Um, oh, thank you very much. Yeah, no, thank you. I've heard that it's in the top 5% of um, of articles in the Nature family in terms of downloads, and it's available in public access. So it's gotten a lot of hits. Um, so I want to complete that phase 2 clinical trial this year. That's a goal. Um, and then evaluate that data and then consider what's the phase 3 look like to bring that ultimately to approval. We've been in active discussions with the FDA about what that trial could look like. The second thing I mentioned, leptomeningeal cancer. There's an epidemic of LM cancer, probably affects somewhere between 250 and 400,000 patients every year in the U.S. We're looking, we've completed the phase 1. We're starting a dose optimization trial that we've been working with the FDA on. We'll hope to get that started and substantially enrolled this year, hopefully. And then we're looking at a single dose expansion trial and working with the FDA to look at the most accelerated path to market. We show that a single dose is safe and looks to be effective in terms of response and survival in our phase 1 trial, which is very unusual in a phase 1 trial. Usually you're just looking for safety and some level of response. Since there's nothing approved, we're optimistic that the FDA will be collaborative and work with us in terms of trying to find the quickest way to get that to patients in a safe way. And then the third level, from a milestone perspective, is this has been a slow process, but we've been diligent working with the FDA to bring what we're doing for adult brain cancers into a pediatric population. And the FDA rightly is very concerned about safety in kids. And I think hopefully we've resolved all the open issues. We have enough adult clinical data and additional data that the FDA has requested that we can get that trial up and running this year at Northwestern University. That's the Lurie Children's Hospital in Chicago, which has been the lead site driving that. So therapeutically, a number of milestones that are really 2025 milestones. And then what I haven't mentioned, because I don't think it's not the focus of this discussion, but we recently acquired the market-leading diagnostic for cancers of the cerebral spinal fluid that was commercially available. Um, and we've acquired that technology and we're relaunching it this year.
Oh, wow.
Uh, and we think that's been put into a separate company called CNside Diagnostics. It's a platform for the diagnosis in a highly sensitive way of cancers in the fluid around the brain and spinal cord. It tells you how many tumor cells that are there, so patients you can make a very clear diagnosis of, do the patients have cancer in their CSF, or as importantly, patients that are suspicious for that, we can rule it out, and so we can give them the comfort that, hey, you don't have this devastating disease. But it also allows us to follow treatment. We can tell whether the cells are going up and the treatment's not working, or the cells are going down and the treatment's working. And then we can also look for what are called actionable biomarkers. So, for example, is if it's a breast cancer and metastasized to the brain, what's the HER2 expression pattern of that? That has therapeutic implications. And so it's important to know that when one thinks about therapy, and then do that over multiple different types of biomarkers. So we have this platform that looks at cell number, actionable mutations, and gene expression and protein expression to be able to give the doctor really a portfolio of information upon which they can make quick diagnoses and accurate therapeutic decisions. And when you're talking about disease, in this case, these patients have 4 to 6 weeks to live on average. After diagnosis, time is really of the essence. You've got to make quick decisions. So we're really excited about that opportunity. That's a significant opportunity as it relates to patient care, but also commercially. And we just recently hired a former general manager of Abbott's hematology division to come in and run that for us. And he's just getting up and running, and we'll be getting that launched into the market very soon this year.
Excellent. Busy times indeed at Plus Therapeutics. A lot of exciting stuff. And Dr. Hedrick, thank you so much for your time in sharing all of the exciting work that you're leading at the company. And we look forward to all of those milestones. And we here at Xtalks will definitely keep our eyes out and keep a watch out for everything at Plus Therapeutics. And we'd love to have you back to discuss more milestones and to discuss the latest and greatest that's happening at the company and in the field. So thank you once again for your insights and for your time.
You bet. Thank you, Ayesha. Appreciate it.
That's the end of this episode of the Xtalks Life Science Podcast. If you liked today's show, don't forget to rate, review, and subscribe. Thank you, everyone, and we will see you next week. Bye for now.
To join the Xtalks community, visit xtalks.com and register for exclusive access to curated content like live webinars, news articles, and educational videos. The views and opinions expressed in this podcast are those of the speakers sharing them and should not be taken as professional advice, nor do they necessarily reflect the policy or position of Honeycomb Worldwide. For further information, email us at podcast@xtalks.com.